And we are now going to take a step in the right direction and head down to Cuba, where Cubans approved gay marriage by a rather large margin in a recent referendum. There was a vote held, even with the hurricane that just came through and caused such damage in the country. And same sex marriage was passed by 66%, which is pretty overwhelming for most votes, but not quite what you would expect from Cuba. So it's kind of an interesting
Mhm.
story, and one I think we should keep an eye on because there is kind of some weird things that are happening there with it. I think I'll get into that in a second, but I'm going to throw it over to Phil if I can and see what he thinks about this story. Because that this is almost regional for you, is it not?
Mm. Yes, it is. And I was really happy to hear that Cuba was having a referendum on this and that the people spoke and indicated, yes, go ahead with the same sex marriage legislation, same sex couples adopting children, legalizing civil unions, allowing equal domestic rights, responsibilities between men and women. This is in the right direction. And as Kelley said, the majority of the Cubans, and a good, fairly sizable majority, 67, percent, said yes, right? And maybe Cuba is realizing that it is too costly for their gross domestic product not to do this. Unlike other Caribbean countries not realizing that, right? And another interesting thing is that when I looked at the statistics of religious affiliation in Cuba, surprisingly, it says 61.7% are Christian. Hmm. 21.1% are agnostic atheists. So, for a country where the majority are Christians and the majority of the population voted yes to these things, that says a lot. You'll find in Caribbean, English speaking Caribbean countries who are very highly religious, they still have laws against LGBTQ. There's no laws allowing for same-sex couples to marry, adopt children. Um, right? So this is really good to see. And then I remember looking at this, finding an article talking about some research that was done that shows that those countries that still have these bigoted laws in place, they are actually losing billions of dollars to their GDP because the LGBTQ um, plus persons want to be in a country that is friendly to them, where they can work freely without discrimination. Because there's a lot of discrimination in a lot of these religious Caribbean countries towards LGBTQ plus. And I remember speaking with one who went for a job, a trans woman who went for a job. Everything was going fine until she said, I am trans. It went downhill. The interview went downhill from there. So there is a problem in the other Caribbean countries, and they need to follow Cuba's example. As I said before, if you claim to be a pluralistic society, you have to cater for everyone and not let Christian dogma or religious dogma run things. Because when that happens, everyone else suffers. On to you, Kelley.
Well, Phil, one of the things I was happy to see about this, and you mentioned that discrimination that you in the story you just told us.
Mhm.
One of the things I was really happy to see in this voter referendum is it did make it illegal to discriminate against LGBTQ individuals, as well as giving them the right to marry, of same-sex marriage. It really doesn't help to give people rights if you're not going to protect those rights, right? And this referendum did that. And it also made it legal for a same-sex couple to adopt a child, which was pretty progressive too, I thought. And you mentioned that other Caribbean nations really need to follow Cuba's lead on this. Cuba has been on the tail end of legalizing same-sex marriage actually throughout Latin America. However, among Caribbean nations, it's in the forefront of legalizing. Most Caribbean nations, it is still illegal for same-sex marriage today. And in 2017, Human Rights Watch published a PDF entitled "I Had to Leave to Be Me," which was a study of LGBTQ discriminations and laws in Caribbean countries, with suggestions for the governments of actually several nations to help alleviate the plight of the community in those countries. And not a lot has been done with that yet, but it's my hope that most of them have at least read this study and are seriously considering the recommendations that were made. But at present, I just don't see anything happening quickly on this front. August, do you have any thoughts about this?
I mean, yeah, I think I would just kind of go off of what you guys said, but also add that the history that I could see had gay men being put into labor camps. And I just think that's completely abhorrent. And I do want to say that I think it's interesting that not only was gay marriage legalized, but it appears to be in the same vote they're giving the right for people of same-sex relationships to also adopt, which I think is kind of interesting that they are putting such progressive laws in place at the same time, you know, because I feel like so many times it's like, okay, you guys can get married, but we're not going to let you adopt kids. That's just too far. So the fact that they did both of those in the same vote is kind of I think pretty progressive and pretty interesting. And I almost wonder how long the public opinion in Cuba has been this way, seeing as how the vast majority, I mean, like you guys said, the 67 about percent voting yes, I think that kind of shows that this might have been the public opinion for a while, and maybe they just didn't have a vote on this until now. But I also saw that they are Cuba, that is one of the first Latin American countries to celebrate Pride Month. So I think this is a lot of progressive laws and you know, public opinion surfacing that, you know, it makes me wonder how long people have thought this. And even it appears that even the Cuban president it supports this as well, and said, I believe the quote was, you know, justice has been done. So I think that's incredibly interesting that, you know, even the president supports it. So yeah, I don't know. It's just it's interesting, and of course, as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community myself, although I'm American, I'm not Cuban, but it's always a good thing to see these kind of things come into you know, what most of us, I hope, kind of already think is I've never understood why anyone has a problem with it. I guess I'm showing my age in that, where I wasn't really around when the opinion was different. But yeah, Kelley, do you have any kind of opinion on that?
Well, I have some second thoughts about the 66% large majority, and I have some interesting views of that. The minority vote of 33% was actually huge for a dissenting vote against the government referendum in Cuba. This referendum was supported by the president. It was supported by the government. They asked the people to vote for it, right? And usually when that happens in Cuba for the past decades, it's almost 98% overwhelmingly in favor of the referendum. So this 33% dissenting vote is huge. And it shows you that people are less afraid to stand up to the government because the old Castro guard is gone. and you have a younger group of people who are coming of age who never grew up under that yoke, right? And they're more willing to dissent against the government. But one of the things I worry about is that's who was voting in this 33%, right? And I'm hoping that it was half of those 66% of Christians that Phil mentioned, and it wasn't the younger group that are willing to be dissentive against the government, but maybe some old school Christians who are finding a little bit of new freedom and using that freedom to dissent against the government. So let's keep our fingers crossed that this isn't something happening among the younger the voters in Castro or voters in Cuba.
Well, and also the article says that they think that the dissenting views were spread more widely because of access to the internet in Cuba. So I also wonder how that comes into effect. I guess as a young person myself, and there's a different culture in the United States and whatnot, but I really hope it's not my generation that's saying that this shouldn't happen, especially because we're the ones that are going to be coming up, and we're in the age that we're starting to get married and starting to want families. And so that would be interesting to see exactly what the demographics of the different votes were.
Yeah, definitely. And Kelley said something about his gay pride.
Yeah, it was the first
The
Latin American country to
oh
celebrate
right,
Pride
the
Month.
first Latin
Yeah.
American. Within now looking at the other Caribbean countries, the English like here in Barbados. Back in 2018, there was a gay pride march, and in opposition to the gay pride march, you had a number of church leaders getting together, and they said this agenda is a new form of neocolonialism because it hasn't emerged from Barbados. It is a global agenda to influence different nations. In fact, they say that agencies are attaching aid and economic support and technical assistance to the LGBTQ agenda. But I asked, but what agenda? And then you can have someone who's a sociologist who's supposed to have done research, but this person is a Christian, and she said some people understand it is just one small group that's attempting to change God's word. They cannot ever. So when we're talking about countries, these countries, Caribbean countries need to change. Yes, they need to change. But then you have the a lot of evangelical leaders, especially in countries where the English-speaking Caribbean, where evangelical churches or fundamentalist churches make up a large percentage of the population, right? You get pushback. They don't want these things changed because they want to impose their dogma on everyone else. And the sad thing is that the governments pander to these groups. That's the sad thing. So yes, they need to change. That is why I keep saying that there are people here who see this as wrong, but we need to speak out to let people know, look, y'all are not the only ones here. We are also here, people who don't agree with you, right? And you can't just be pushing your dogma on everyone else because it doesn't benefit society. And it is marginalizing, it is discriminatory, it is bigoted, it is just sickening, right?
I find that so illogical to say that being inclusive of other people is equated to colonialism. That doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Bruh, don't make
That's
sense.
just such an illogical argument
Yeah,
to make. It just blows me away.
it is. It is. And especially when you have someone who's supposed to be a doctor of sociology,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
showing you that they are discarding their training in sociological research to push the Christian agenda, to push the religious agenda.
it just seems to me that colonialism was based on not being inclusive of people. So it just doesn't, I'm just
Yeah.
blown away by that argument. It just doesn't make any sense at all to me. I'm drawing a complete blank in my mind on that one. It's just, I could think of maybe 100 different other arguments they could have used that were better than that one. So yeah, I'm,
Yeah.
one of the things, we all read the story, and there were several photographs that accompanied the story. Did anybody else get creeped out by the kids in the red uniform standing on the other side of the poles? It kind of
Yes.
Oh,
creeped me out, but
absolutely. Yeah, that
Absolutely.
was
Yeah, that freaked
yeah,
me out. I was
and
like, huh, what's going on here?
yeah, they for our viewers, please go look at the link. There are some great photographs, and the children almost look robotic in a couple of the photographs too. It's really kind of creepy. So
yeah, and
I'm not.
the caption under the photo says that the gentleman that's standing between the children is voting. So it's kind of odd.
Mhm.
I think it was like a ballot box, and he was dropping his ballot into the box, and they were standing on either side of the
Mhm.
ballot box. But it was still really weird. It's just, and I wondered why it had to be children. That was one of the things.
Mm,
Why didn't they have adults who were
Mm.
like we have election officials here in the United States, right? Or poll
Yeah.
right,
watchers, and they're using children as poll watchers basically. And I found that a little weird.
right.
And and
Mm.
and the way they were standing there so robotically with those uniforms on,
Mhm.
that's what I found creepy. I think. Phil, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I also saw in the article that the said even though they did not have foreign observers, that a lot of the adults did watch the polls, observe the polls, and the reports that they got locally from those adults matched the results, basically. Right?
Hmm.
So
Mm.
even though the children were there standing next to the ballot box, I don't suspect there were observers, but apparently there were local persons who were observing
Yeah,
them.
from what I understood, anybody could have access to the ballots to make sure that they were done correctly. It seemed like from the
Yeah,
way the article was written, and I found that
yeah.
interesting too, because that's not allowed here in the
Hmm.
states, especially with the electronic
Mm.
machines. Not everybody has access to that information. So
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
theirs looks like an actual box where you put the piece of paper in. Yeah. So,
yeah, right.
Hmm.
and one of the other pictures has the kids like helping a more elderly woman, it appears, put her vote in, which again, as Kelley described, it would be odd to us in the United States to have that happen. Usually that's frowned upon.
Yeah. And I won't be surprised that Cuba's GDP over doing this over years will improve because now they have widened their base of resource base.
Hmm.
So now persons, as I quote said before, there's some research showing that those countries who have the bigoted laws, they are suffering not only in the Caribbean, but the research also shows in other European countries, some European countries who still have bigoted laws, that they are losing out a lot of money because of those laws. So I won't be surprised if Cuba's GDP improves because they have put these progressive laws in place.
Right, right. And as the I mean, Cuba's trying to open themselves up too and attract tourism, and
Hmm.
this is going to help that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, it'll be interesting to see how it really changes the country. So, I mean, it's something for us to keep an
Hmm.
eye on.